Lance Corporal Jack Anderson had finished his watch and planned to get some sleep.
It was a Sunday, you know, and Sundays were a little more relaxing.
Then, at 6:22 a.m.,
half asleep, I heard this loudest, flat sound that I'd never heard. I'd never heard a noise that loud in my whole career. And this steel door that was beside me, it blew in, and it just missed me.
And then all of a sudden there was this enormous thud, and about 3 seconds later I could feel this heat drawing my face back, and a couple seconds after that the concussion from the blast just picked me up and threw me backwards.
Gatto's decision to get a cup of coffee had saved his life.
So I hightailed it back to my boss, Major Bob Jordan.
And his eyes were like saucers, and I said, Sergeant Gatto, what's going on? And he said, sir, the BLT's gone. And
he said, you know, that's like saying the Twin Towers are gone. I mean, it's not something you expect somebody to say to you.
The massive 4-story structure, considered to be one of the safest in Beirut, was reduced to a 1-story mass of rubble, a tomb for hundreds of Marines, sailors, and soldiers.
We grabbed cots and stretchers and whatever we could find, and we went down and started extricating the wounded and the dead.
Remarkably, Corporal Jack Anderson slept through the explosion, a 3-story fall, and survived.
My first conscious thought after the bombing was waking up on the ground with a couple of pieces of concrete sort of in a lean-to position above me.
That delicate balance saved Anderson's life. Had either slab landed on him, he would have been crushed to death.
Yeah, I was sort of in delirium, in shock. Obviously probably took a pretty severe blow to the head if you fall 3 floors and land on the asphalt, you know. So I sort of made my way, crawled out through the concrete and got out, and sort of looked around. The building was completely devastated. There were bodies laying around. There were body parts laying around. All of my buddies just got killed. I was, my best friend was 1 floor below me in the same room. Didn't make it. That took a long time to get over that.
The United States had sent its best into Beirut to keep the peace. But in a matter of seconds, that all changed when they became victims of a chilling new tactic of terror. Gerald Butt was a BBC radio correspondent in Beirut.
So here was the first concrete proof, in my mind anyway, that the conflict in Lebanon had moved up several notches. Here we were dealing not with bombs in conventional sense, shelling, sniping that we had got used to. Here were people who were prepared to give their lives for the cause, and if necessary, cause the deaths of hundreds of people.
Coming up, the real beginning of the War on Terror.
CNN presents, brought to you by Mercedes-Benz, located on the web at mbUSA.com.
Start a summer romance that lasts a lifetime. The Mercedes-Benz summer event. Cruise into your local authorized Mercedes-Benz dealer for great lease and financing offers on select models.
Introducing new Vanilla Mint Listerine, a less intense Listerine. Every bit as powerful at fighting germs that cause plaque, gingivitis, and bad breath. Plus, it has a less intense vanilla mint taste. Now there's a Listerine for everybody.
Honesty, privacy, respect, and great rates. That's why people who use E-Loan are spreading the word. Those are just some of the revolutionary ways we're changing the lending industry. E-Loan, radically simple.
Hi-ho, hi-ho.
Can you tell the difference between these pet medications? They're exactly the same, but these medications cost a lot less. I save the trip to the vet's office and call 1-800-PET-MEDS or order online, and my pet's medications are delivered right to my door. It's so easy. That's the 1-800-PET-MEDS difference. Great savings, fast service, free shipping.
1-800-PET-MEDS, America's largest pet pharmacy, saves you time and money on all your pet's medications.
Order online or call now.
TD Ameritrade's Apex traders are among the best in the business.
I have my own way to trade. I look for breakouts, sleepers. It can be risky stuff.
We know what active traders want, like 24/7 support and powerful trading tools. Get free trades for 45 days and $500 cash, and get $9.99 trades. Call 877-TD Ameritrade.
Independence is the spirit that drives America's most successful investors.
At the time of the Marine barracks bombing, Lebanon was a nation on the brink. The United States had stepped in to help, to keep the peace. But the humanitarian mission was ill-fated. Years of civil war and political turmoil would soon turn deadly for the U.S. CNN's Brent Sadler was there.
In its heyday, the early 1970s, Beirut was known as the Paris of the Middle East. More than 1 million tourists a year. And there was international intrigue.
It was a field day for the intelligence operatives of the world.
Richard Murphy was an Assistant Secretary of State in the Reagan administration.
Everybody was busily trying to develop sources of intelligence and having a fine time spying on each other.
In 1975, Lebanon fell into civil war. Tensions over how the country's religious groups, Sunnis, Shiites, Druze and Christians, shared political power had reached the breaking point. Each political and religious group had its own militia.
This war was just brutal, but the real brutality of it came because these various religious groups all had foreign sponsors. And they're the ones who provided the weapons and firepower that really enabled these militias to just absolutely decimate each other.
It was the era of the Cold War.
Amin Gemayel, a Christian, was president from 1982 to 1988.
The Cold War was everywhere except in Lebanon. In Lebanon it was the hot and very hot war.
Although sporadic fighting is continuing, the area is now said to be safe, but no one knows for how long it will be.
As a correspondent covering that war, I saw it spiral out of control, witnessing the Paris of the Middle East becoming the powder keg of the Middle East. The war would claim 150,000 lives.
If they were killed or maimed or houses destroyed, whatever, so be it, as long as your particular group survived.
One group in the middle of the turmoil was the Palestinians. Thousands came to Lebanon as refugees from the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. And in 1971, the Palestine Liberation Organization moved to Lebanon.
Yasser Arafat was the leader. He took up residence in Beirut, and they had training camps. They had territories which were theirs to run.
Palestinian forces took control of parts of Beirut and southern Lebanon.
They exploited our democracy, they exploited our pluralism, our freedom to establish their own stronghold in Lebanon.
The Palestinian stronghold in southern Lebanon became a base for guerrilla attacks against Israel. And that scared the Lebanese.
They were very conscious that Israel was operating on a hair trigger.
That trigger was pulled in June of 1982. Israeli forces stormed into Lebanon.
They actually went into Beirut, surrounded the city, and put the city under siege for over 2 months, and it just devastated the city.
Go, Marines! What evolved that August was a deal. A multinational force, Americans, French and Italians, would come to Lebanon as peacekeepers.
What do you feel before leaving?
It allowed Arafat and the PLO safe passage out of Lebanon.
So the mission was accomplished, and the Marines were gone in something like 2 to 3 weeks.
The idea was you send this multinational force in, you evacuate the Palestinians, and then that would stabilize the area. Well, it didn't work.
4 days after the Marines pulled out, Lebanon's president-elect, a Christian, was murdered in an explosion at his party's headquarters. The next day, Israeli forces moved deeper into Beirut. And the day after that, Christian militia units allied with Israel massacred hundreds of Palestinians in a poor refugee area called Sabra and Shatila.
They were innocent men, women, and children in that refugee camp who were hunted down like animals. And after that, everything was up for grabs, which led to a plea.
Lebanon can no longer endure.
Send the Marines back. We need them. You've got to help.
When we come back, U.S. troops drawn into a deadly drama.
The SUV from the creator of Quattro.
What if your student went on to become a terrorist leader in the footsteps of Bin Laden? Wednesday, August 23rd, only on CNN.
Sure, they're juicy and delicious. But did you know fruits like melon and mango are packed with vitamin A to help you see better? Eating fruit can also help make your teeth, skin, and hair healthy and strong.
indoor food do that. Run, throw, think, eat better. Find out more at smallstep.gov.
Life is meant to be celebrated. Choose your celebrations wisely with a gift from Enix Jewelers. With a selection to match any occasion or price range, it's no wonder customers keep returning to Enix for special gifts at special times. Choose from a large selection of earrings, necklaces, bracelets, and rings, all beautifully designed. We offer a variety of timepieces from Citizens, Seiko, Rolex, and more. Come to the professionals for the best selection and discover how affordable quality jewelry can be.
Mideast bloodshed continues as diplomacy heats up. Larry King, 9 Eastern.
Beirut, September 29th, 1982. U.S. Marines are hailed as heroes, returning once again to Lebanon to help keep the peace. 1,200 U.S. Marines led a multinational peacekeeping force of Italian, French, and British soldiers. After nearly 10 years of a brutal, bloody civil war, Beirut had become synonymous with destruction. But there was a widespread hope that change was on the horizon.
There was a sense of optimism, and at first the Americans, the British and the Italians, they were very much welcomed by the population at large. One could see Americans driving around the center of Beirut and waving to people, going to bars, going to restaurants and so on.
President Ronald Reagan emphasized that American troops were there to spread peace, not to engage in more violence.
In the days ahead, they and forces from France and Italy will be playing an important but carefully limited non-combatant role. The parties to the plan have agreed to this role and have provided assurances on the safety of our forces.
It was simply a presence. It was thought if the United States was there, everything would calm down and that we would not have to involve our soldiers in combat.
At first, the Marines kept a low profile. They spent most of their time clearing the beach of landmines, securing their position at Beirut's international airport. With their men and resources stationed in one place, the Marines were in the middle of a firestorm. But their presence alone was not enough to end the fighting between warring factions that were as native to Lebanon as the sea and the soil.
We were static in an international airport without control outside of our wire. Security was generally deteriorating pretty fast. We were a vulnerable target. We all were.
But soon, despite all declarations of neutrality, the Americans were caught in the crossfire, or worse, taking direct fire.
We have the Amal, the Druze, and the Syrians, and we don't feel so safe because they're around.
For the Marines at the airport barracks, under strict orders to keep their firearms unloaded, it was a source of huge frustration.
They should update the rules of engagement, because we'll be out here and we get fired at, then we have to wait to get permission to fire back.
Without a loaded magazine, we don't have as much of a chance, I believe, to defend ourselves.
It was also a huge frustration to President Reagan and his closest advisors, who pressed for a more active role for the troops.
We were opposed in that concept by Cap Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, who felt very strongly that the Marines should not be involved in what would amount to combat operations.
While Weinberger won that round, it was a hollow victory. Increasingly, the men once hailed as heroes were being branded the enemy. Suddenly, Marines were taking hits. Americans were seeing the sad pictures of more and more caskets coming home. But nothing could prepare them for April 18, 1983. A car bomb explodes in front of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, killing 63 people.
Let us here in their presence serve notice to the cowardly, skulking barbarians in the world that they will not have their way.
In the aftermath, calls to bring the Marines home grew louder.
We're not helping one bit, risking the lives of American Marines serving over there trying to keep peace when they've got a bunch of jackasses who want to kill each other. I'd get out of there and let them shoot.
But President Reagan disagreed.
We have vital interests in Lebanon, and our actions in Lebanon are in the cause of world peace.
When the U.S. warships launched shells into the mountains overlooking Beirut, Marine Colonel Timothy Garrity immediately knew his men were in danger.
Colonel Garrity called headquarters and objected to that order to use naval gunfire. He said, "Sir, you have to understand, they have 750 artillery pieces. At any moment, if they unleash them, we know we are going to be dust. And when that first shell comes over, our neutrality is gone."
Certain decisions were made that were escalating our mission there. We were firing in direct support of Lebanese army in an operation that clearly was outside of the realm of our mission. I think that was a significant move that created this perception among other Lebanese forces that we were just another super militia.
Get down! The peacekeepers were vulnerable and unprepared.
It was like having your hands tied and having someone shoot at you. There was really no place to run. Yeah, I've had small arms before, but nothing like this. And yeah, it's nervous. Blood pressure goes up. Your muscles start spazzing a little bit.
It worries me. Worry every day. Can't do nothing now. What can you do?
You ever worry there might be something so big that it, you know?
I can't handle it, always. That's the first thing running in my mind, is am I capable enough to handle that? I know you felt that vibration. And that was over there.
When we come back, the unimaginable, the anatomy of a suicide bombing.
A 7-speed automatic transmission, a 268 horsepower engine. Start a summer romance that lasts a lifetime. The Mercedes-Benz Summer Event. See your local authorized Mercedes-Benz dealer for a great lease offer on a powerful 2006 E350 sedan.
I think it happens to a lot of guys over 50. See, I was always going during the movies and hating to stand up, going during a presentation and hating to stand out.
For you this afternoon.
And once I got there, I had trouble going, and I was going 3 times a night. I said to my doctor, "I have a going problem." He said, "You have a growing problem. It's not your bladder. Your prostate is growing." See, I had an enlarging prostate. My doctor prescribed Avodart.
Most medicines only treat symptoms. Avodart, with time, actually shrinks the prostate and improves urinary symptoms.
So I can go more easily when I need to go, and go less often.
Only your doctor can tell if your symptoms are from an enlarged prostate and not a more serious condition such as prostate cancer, so have regular prostate exams. Avodart is for men only. Women should not take or handle Avodart due to the risk of a specific birth defect. Tell your doctor if you have liver disease. Rarely, sexual side effects, tenderness, or swelling of the breast can occur. Call your doctor today. Avodart for your growing problem.
They may be after me now.
No, I'm after them. The bugs and the germs they carry. Ma'am, we're not allowed to have anyone in the truck.
Right. Thank you.
Protect your home. Protect your family. For help, call 800-800-ORCAN.
Purell users see the world differently. They don't see
This is CNN Breaking News.
Good evening, I'm Carol Lynn with a new development out of the United Nations. We're going to go to our United Nations senior correspondent Richard Roth on the scene right now. Richard.
Carol, the UN Security Council is poised to adopt a statement to be read by the President of the Security Council, the ambassador from France, about what happened in Cana. Here we go, let's listen.
In the Middle East. End of quote. Unless I hear any objection, I shall consider the agenda adopted. The agenda is adopted.
En application de la décision prise à la
5498th meeting held earlier today, I acknowledge the presence of the representatives of Israel and Lebanon at the Council table in accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure.
The
Security Council will now resume its consideration of item 2 of the agenda.
Le Conseil se réunit
The Security Council is meeting in accordance with the understanding reached in its prior consultations. After consultations among members of the Security Council, I have been authorized to make the following statement on behalf of the Council. I quote.
Le Conseil de sécurité
The Security Council expresses its
par le bombardement
at the shelling
by
the Israeli defense forces of a residential building in Cana, in southern,
qui a entraîné la mort de dizaines de
killing of dozens of civilians, mostly children, and injured many others. The Security Council sends its deepest condolences to the families of the victims and to the Lebanese people. The Security Council strongly deplores this loss of innocent lives and the killing of civilians in the present conflict, and requests the Secretary-General to report to it within 1 week on the circumstances of this tragic incident. The Security Council expresses its concern at the threat of escalation of violence with further grave consequences for the humanitarian situation, calls for an end to violence, and underscores the urgency of securing a lasting, permanent and sustainable ceasefire. The Security Council expresses again its utmost concern at the Lebanese and Israeli civilian casualties and human suffering, the widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure, and the increased number of internally displaced persons. The Security Council urges all parties to grant immediate and unlimited access to humanitarian assistance. The Security Council deplores any action against United Nations personnel and calls for full respect for the safety and security of all United Nations personnel and premises. The Security Council affirms its determination to work without any further delay to adopt a resolution for a lasting settlement of the crisis, drawing on diplomatic efforts underway. The Security Council remains seized of the matter. End of quote. This statement will be issued as a document of the Security Council under the symbol S/PRST/2006/35. The Security Council has thus concluded the present stage of its consideration of the item on its agenda. The meeting is adjourned.
That's the French ambassador for the UN Security Council. That's the President of the Security Council. What's important to note in that there was no call, an immediate demand for a ceasefire or a cessation of hostilities. The final wording was the Security Council calls for an end to violence. The United States clearly blocking any tougher language. Qatar, the sole Arab representative on the 15-nation council, was interested in harsher language. The resolution that the French ambassador talks about is something that it may be days away. First, they need to have some type of peace between the participants. Carol.
Richard, so if this sort of statement doesn't really have any teeth, what is its purpose then?
Well, it's getting there. It's the first reaction by the Security Council to some of the hostilities, even though the Council the other day said that it was critical of Israel for its attack on that UN base. But the Council is still divided. Now, whether there's a tipping point and whether something happens, I don't know. But this is significant for the Security Council, but they're still not there. They didn't give Kofi Annan what he wanted. He said he was dismayed today that the full Council was not able to issue a demand for the immediate cessation of hostilities.
Richard Roth, our senior correspondent at the United Nations, thank you very much. I'm Carol Lynn at the CNN World Headquarters in Atlanta. We are going to have continuing coverage of the Middle East crisis, including John Roberts joining me at 10 o'clock in our primetime newscast. John Roberts also hosting CNN's Larry King Live. In the meantime, we are going to continue with our programming here on CNN. More news as it happens.
A bomb rips through the barracks of the French peacekeeping force just a few miles away, killing 58 paratroopers. Rescue efforts continue for days, at times hindered by sniper fire. Retired Colonel Timothy Garrity was the Marine commander in Beirut.
The ground was moaning because there were survivors in there.
The United States had suffered the largest loss of military life in a single incident since Iwo Jima. 220 Marines, 18 Navy sailors, and 3 Army soldiers killed by a lone suicide bomber.
This was such a overt, pure, naked act of terrorism. We had absolutely no warning of something of this magnitude that hit us.
Back home, a mourning nation demanded answers. How did it happen? Who was responsible? Should the U.S. strike back? A full-scale investigation began immediately. Retired Lieutenant General Lawrence Snowden served on the investigation into the attack.
We had every reason to believe that Hezbollah was the unit that did the job. And we do know that the operation had the support of the Syrian government and the Iranian government.
Hezbollah denies any responsibility. Mark Perry has studied Hezbollah for years and has discussed the bombing with several members.
In the talks that I've had with them in Beirut, they say the United States is not our enemy. We do not have American blood on our hands. We do not want to have a conflict with the United States. And I would place the barracks bombing at the doorstep of Iran.
A civil case in 2003 did just that. The judge ruled the suicide bombing was carried out by Hezbollah with the approval and funding of Iran. Retired Admiral James Lyons testified U.S. officials intercepted a message from the Iranian ambassador to Syria.
This is the smoking gun. There was proof positive to coordinate their attacks against the multinational force, and in particular, the United States Marines.
The court also heard the videotaped testimony of a Hezbollah member known as Mahmoud. Mahmoud described how Hezbollah ambushed a water truck en route to the compound. A similar truck laden with very sophisticated explosives continued on to the barracks. The driver would later be nicknamed Smiling Death by a Marine guard who recalled the bomber's chilling expression as he crashed through the gates just before the explosion.
It was unfortunate that so many troops were allowed to be in that building at one time.
I was criticized quite severely, one, for having that many Marines in a single building. I had absolutely no choice. We were taking shelling. It was considered to be one of the safest, sturdiest buildings in Beirut.
Marine commanders were also criticized for having guards with empty weapons.
There was a real concern that if there was an accidental discharge of a weapon, some, quote, innocent civilian might be killed or wounded in that parking lot. But in hindsight, it was not a good idea.
As the list of suspects narrowed, U.S. officials say this man, Imad Mughniya, emerged as the mastermind. Mughniya was Hezbollah's security chief at the time of the bombing.
He's much better than bin Laden because he stays off television. He doesn't identify himself. And you don't ever see a defector from his inner circle, or, you know, one that lives very long.
Coming up, the U.S. response to terror, paralyzed by White House infighting.
years in this house. So many memories, huh?
Hey, you know what? Those, good to take with you.
Yeah.
See you in a couple of hours.
Bye-bye.
Hello, you two. I'm Nancy. Let me tell you the story of this amazing house.
Century 21.
Imagine you had a great idea and shared it with the world. To make it a better place. To make it cleaner and quieter. To make people more comfortable. Businesses more successful. The world more connected. Would an idea that great ever fly? It will. And like nothing else. Boeing, forever new frontiers.
At Johnson & Johnson, we understand the importance of a nurse's touch.
How you doing, Mr. Powell?
Just want you to breathe normally, okay? A nurse's touch can touch the world. Nurses, we need you more than ever.
Enjoy.
A message of caring from Johnson & Johnson.
Introducing new Vanilla Mint Listerine, a less intense Listerine. Every bit as powerful at fighting germs that cause plaque, gingivitis, and bad breath. Plus, it has a less intense vanilla mint taste. Now there's a Listerine for everybody.
24/7 access, simple process, and great home equity rates. That's why people who use eLoan are getting the message around. Those are just some of the revolutionary ways we're changing the lending industry. eLoan, radically simple.
Saturday, October 22nd, President Ronald Reagan was in Augusta, Georgia, playing a round of golf on the fabled course that is home to the Masters. Late that night, National Security Advisor Robert McFarland got a phone call.
At about 2 in the morning, I had a call from the Vice President Bush, that the Marines had been bombed in Lebanon. The President, I wakened him at about 2 in the morning and advised him of it. He was shattered by the event.
The President was in his pajamas when he met with McFarland and Secretary of State George Shultz.
The President listened and physically was drained. After a long pause, he asked, Bud, how did it happen? Who did it? How can we deal with this?
Get tougher. Take on the terrorists, they decided, as Reagan flew back to Washington at first light. Vice President George Bush rushed to Beirut, to the bomb site. He left little doubt that the U.S. would retaliate.
We're not going to let a bunch of insidious terrorists, cowards, shape the foreign policy of the United States.
That same week, the U.S. invaded the small Caribbean nation of Grenada, a minor crisis now largely forgotten.
In Lebanon, we have some 1,600 Marines.
On national television, when he turned from Grenada to Beirut, Reagan rattled the sabers.
Those who directed this atrocity must be dealt justice, and they will be.
He rejected a Marine withdrawal.
If we were to leave Lebanon now, what message would that send to those who foment instability and terrorism?
His words became empty promises, abandoned within months.
Well, I wrote that language, and I took it seriously at the time and intended and believed that he intended to fulfill it.
At the end of the week, the first caskets began coming home. The next week, on a damp and dreary day, Ronald and Nancy Reagan went to the Marine base at Camp Lejeune to mourn along with the grieving nation.
He always took very personally the loss of life of any American. especially servicemen.
By now, American intelligence had traced the seeds of the attack to a barracks in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, where Hezbollah was holed up. The Navy was ready to strike back.
We went ahead and made up the plans. We had the photography. It was a great radar target. There's nothing else around. And we were going to take out all 250 of them.
The president called the National Security Council together. He was convinced himself that the target was responsible in the Bekaa Valley, that the Hezbollah had done the deed, and that's where they trained and were armed. There were arguments, disagreements. Weinberger disagreed, thought it would have a very negative impact on our relations in the Arab states. The president said, well, I believe we have to do this.
We had the planes loaded. It would have been a 1.5-minute strike, in and out in a 1.5 minutes, and we would have sent the message that everybody was waiting for us to send. We never got the orders to launch.
I was awakened at home by the Situation Room with the word that the attack had been aborted. I was speechless. I said, by whom? And I was told the Secretary of Defense. I was thunderstruck. I went on to the office and I called Cap right away and asked him what in the world happened. He said, well, but I believed it was a bad idea and it would have done us great harm. And I said, Cap, the President of the United States approved this.
When McFarland told Reagan, he said the president was at a loss for words. But Cap Weinberger, now deceased, had been a close friend and ally of Reagan since their California days. Reagan would forgive and forget.
At the end of the day, the president was so captive, really, to his feelings of loyalty for Secretary Weinberger that he let it cloud his judgment.
The terrorist attacks continued. Soon, new truck bomb attempts at the French and American embassies in Kuwait. In Beirut, the Marines were hunkered down behind new defensive barriers, doing little or nothing. The White House seemed paralyzed.
And Cap said we simply ought to withdraw.
While the fighting in Lebanon grew worse, Reagan was talking tough, right up until the end. In a radio address early in February, he called the situation in Lebanon difficult.
But that is no reason to turn our backs on friends and to cut and run. If we do, we'll be sending one signal to terrorists everywhere. They can gain by waging war against innocent people.
Yet only 3 days later, the president would order the Marines out. No speeches this time. The announcement was handed out as Reagan landed in California to go on vacation at his ranch. By February 26th, just 4 months after the bombing, the Marines had retreated from Beirut back to ships offshore. Survivor Jack Anderson was glad to see his fellow Marines heading for home, yet was disappointed.
I really wanted to see us do something to be responsible for the car bombing. Hopefully in the end, they get theirs, but not at the hand of the Marine Corps this time.
Coming up, Beirut's deadly lesson for today's war on terror.
As soon as we suffer casualties, we will cut and run. We're a paper cut.
It continues as ceasefire. Larry King Live, coming up next, only on CNN.
You know me as the one candidate for Congress who stands with the president on Iraq. It's not just about their freedom, it's about the security of our families. What good is it stopping the terrorists over there if we allow them to come here? We need to secure our borders with fences and troops now. Because it's not just about stopping illegal immigration. It's about protecting our jobs, our families, and our very way of life. I'm Richard Roberts. I'm running for Congress, and I approve this message.
Claiborne County Hospital Rehabilitation Services, offering physical, aquatic, occupational, speech therapy, and wound care. Providing quality care to Claiborne County, Tennessee, Bell County, Kentucky, and Lee County, Virginia, with 2 convenient outpatient locations, Old Town Square in Tazewell and Cumberland Gap Parkway in Harrogate.